Welcome again as we continue our study with lessons that we learned from the life of David. Today we're going to talk about what happens when friends and family turn against you, those that you should be able to trust. It's times like these that we have to understand David's lesson, and that is trusting that God sees all and judges all. It's his responsibility to take care of us if we're his children. That's the lesson that David learned today. He thought he could trust Saul, and he thought he could trust his wife, or at least he should have been able to, but that certainly was not the case. David's life changed dramatically when he became the king's son-in-law. He lost the first daughter because David, even though he worked hard and fought valiantly, was denied her when Saul gave her to someone else. He made a political alliance, a political marriage. That still left daughter number 2, Michal. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. They told Saul, and the thing pleased him greatly. And he says, I will give her to him, that she will be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. And Saul said to David, you shall indeed be my son-in-law today. See, Saul set out to make David his son-in-law, not because he loved him, but because he wanted to kill him. But being Saul's son-in-law was never God's intention. God never intended David to be the son-in-law of a king. He intended him to be king. That's why he wouldn't take Saul's armor. He wasn't ready for it. That's why he did take Jonathan's armor, as we learned, because he was next in line to be king. But to be the son-in-law of a king, that was a completely different title, a completely different role. And when David had said, when Saul addressed him about taking Merib, David asked a crucial question that's often overlooked. He said, who am I that I should be the king's son-in-law? Many times people try to put us in positions that we were never intended to fulfill. It may look good. It may even have a great title, a high salary, prestige. It may be what friends and family are pushing you for. But the number one question to ask, is this really God's will for me? And is this really the very best for me? Does God have something better planned for me, no matter how good this might look in the eyes of others? Saul knew Michal just as well as he did his daughter Merib. Merib meant to increase, to become better, to be fulfilled. But Michal, he said, Michal is going to become a snare to him. A snare. What that means is a trap, a noose, a scandal. And that's exactly what Michal was throughout David's life. Even after he became king, she was always that problem in his life. With the motive of killing David, which has always been his motive ever since he heard the women sing, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands, Saul came up with a plan. He said, you can be my son-in-law if you kill 100 Philistines and bring me proof. David did not have to earn something that had already been given to him by right when he killed the giant Goliath. But David, being David, an overachiever, the baby of the family, went out and killed 200 Philistines. Probably didn't make Saul any happier. But 1 Samuel 18:28 and 29 tells us something very specific that happened during this time. It said, Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, and that Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul became David's enemy continually. Let's look at this verse in great detail, because it said, when he allowed David to marry Michal, he saw and he knew 3 things. You might think, well, what's the difference, saw and knew? Sort of like in these hot days of summer, You might see that the temperature is 95 outside. You might see it on TV. You might see it on your computer. Maybe you have an inside thermometer that registers the outside temperature. Think, oh, 95, that's got to be hot. You know that. But you open the door and you walk outside, and you're outside for a little bit. Not only have you seen the temperature, you know it. You've experienced it. You feel the heat. You feel the humidity. After a while, your strength starts to drain because of that hot sun beating down on you. You know exactly what 95 degrees feels like now. That's the way it was with Saul. He now knew and he understood from experience that Michal loved David. Now, this love is not the highest form of love. This was a physical love. Yeah, one that she could sell off, the type that Jezebel had for Ahab. She's looking out for her own good. Secondly, he saw that the Lord was with David. No matter what David did, God was with him. That scared Saul because he knew that God had left him. And thirdly, that's it. Saul was more afraid. He became more afraid of David because he knew that no matter what happened, David had God on his side while he no longer did. And so, therefore, as a result of this, it said, Saul became David's enemy continuously. Everywhere David went, Saul was after him. Saul was a great general. Even at the time of his death, when the Israelites knew that they were losing to the Philistines, Saul was still able to surround himself with a great army. But he was a terrible father-in-law. He was a terrible mentor. He never was what David really needed. And because of that, what did David learn from him? Not family relationships, which became his weakness throughout life, but he learned how to develop warriors. And he had better warriors than he had sons. It was God and not Saul who taught David how to reign. Well, things get a little bit worse for David. You see, it was after the marriage that the Philistines and Israel went out to war again. And wouldn't you know it, David goes out again. And because he goes out and because God is with him, he wins the victories. He wins more victories and he behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. Some people never learn. If David didn't win battles, he and Saul got along fine. No issue. But that jealous spirit in Saul arose every time David won battles. But David couldn't help himself. He was the defender of Israel. So Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all the servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted greatly in David. Saul didn't get the message either. What he had done in the past secretly, now he's doing it openly, and he tells everyone, including the crown prince, who is David's best friend. Jonathan tells David to hide. He said, let's let Dad cool off. In the morning, I'll go to him. We'll straighten everything out, and you'll be fine. Just stay out of the way for tonight. David does, and the next day, John, the son, goes to Saul and said, don't sin against your servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his works have been very good toward you and Israel. Remember, he took his life in his own hands when he killed the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all of us. Remember, you saw it, and you rejoiced with us. Why then will you sin against innocent blood to kill David without a cause? Well, Saul did listen to Jonathan, and a temporary agreement was made. And when this was made, it was only temporary reconciliation. You see, Saul took an oath, and he swore that he was going to stop his private war on David. He swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be killed." This change wasn't due to any repentance. It was due to the fact that Jonathan had persuaded him, but more than that, it was due to two other things. Saul knew that he was at war with the Philistines, and David was a great warrior. And also, what Jonathan said made a lot of sense, because he knew that if he killed David, all of the people of Israel who loved David would then turn against him. So he made a decision. I'm going to stop this war. But it was only temporary. Jonathan, though, believed his dad, and he goes and gets David. "Oh, come on back, David. Everything's fine. Everything's wonderful. Don't you worry about a thing." Well, David goes back to work for Saul. Not just to the palace, but he goes back to him. And he was there in the palace, and everything's going fine until chapter 19 tells us there was war again. And David went out and fought with the Philistines. Yep, won another victory. Saul got mad again. David's victory reawakened in Saul that spirit of jealousy and melancholy. And so after the war was over, after the battle was fought, Saul says, "Come on, David. I want you to play again for me." It says, "Now the distressing spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand, and David was playing music with his hand." Now, how about you? Would you do that if you were David? I mean, the Bible tells us over and over he was wise, so why do such a foolish thing? Why go to a man who has tried to kill you twice with a spear and play for him when you've got your hands full and he's sitting there with a spear? Makes no sense to me. Well, David was playing. Saul picks up that spear and throws it so hard it goes right into the wall. David takes off running. He's able to escape. And it says he escaped into the night. Well, he makes it out. And now Saul, his mask is off. He lets everybody know, "I'm going to kill David, and I'm going to kill him tonight." He sends men to his home. Now, David's wife, Michal, is there. She learns of the plan. How she learns, we don't know. Perhaps somebody in Saul's court told her. Perhaps Jonathan got wind of the plan and he goes and tells his sister. Maybe she saw those suspicious people outside of her house and she was just smart enough to figure out what was going on herself. We don't know. But we do know that Michal, David's wife, told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." She set him up. Remember, she was that snare? She let him down through a window. And he was able to escape in the night. And then, says she took an image. She took what we might call a dummy. And she put him in the bed. And then there were goat's hair. And in the Eastern country, the goat's hair is longer than ours here in America. And so she was able to disguise it like hair on David and pulled it up just as though it was a sick person laying in the bed. And when Saul sent the soldiers there, they took a glance over and she said, "Oh, he's too sick. Today we don't want to get around sick people at all." And they probably didn't then either. And so they went back and told Saul. Saul said, "Bring him here on the bed." So they go back and they get him, and Saul discovers it's really not David. It's just that image of David there on the bed. And Saul said to Michal, his daughter, "Why have you deceived me like this and sent my enemy away so that he has escaped?" And here's what Michal, David's wife, replied. "The one who should have defended him. The one who should have stood up for him. The one who really came up with the idea of him running away in the first place. This is what she said. She said, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" That's not at all what David said. It was her idea, not his idea. And this proved to us that everything that Saul knew about his daughter was true. It proved that she was that snare. What does snare mean? A trap. Yeah. She set that trap for the soldiers so that they would come in and they would see this image there and think that it was David. It also means a noose, a rope. She let David down by the rope. And the third meaning of it is a scandal. Michal lied about David. And she told her father. She told the king. She told David's enemy. Oh, he said he was going to kill me if I didn't help him. Can you imagine how Saul grabbed onto this? And how word got around the palace. Poor Michal. David was going to kill her. Her husband threatened to kill her if she didn't let him go. David escaped in the night, and he ran away to Samuel, his friend and his confidant, which we'll talk about that in the next session. But it was after this that David the psalmist wrote Psalms 59. He knows now that he can't trust his father-in-law. He can't trust his wife, who should be his best friend. He can't trust Jonathan even because Jonathan can't protect him all the time. He's been betrayed and he's been denied. And so he wrote Psalms 59. And this is some of what that psalm says. "Deliver me from my enemies, O my God. Defend me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity and save me from bloodthirsty men." That was Saul. That was the soldiers. They were all out to get him. "They run and they prepare themselves through no fault of mine." David's saying, I'm innocent. I have not done a thing. They're trying to kill me even though I'm innocent. And at evening they return. See, he wrote this because it was at nighttime. He says at evening, there they are at night. They're stalking me. They're looking for me. And they go all around the city. They're trying to find me wherever they can. But what does he say? He says, "I will sing aloud of your mercy in the morning, for you have been my defense and my refuge in the day of trouble. For God is my defense." David was fleeing in the night. He was running for his life from his family and his home, but he had the confidence. He said, "I will sing aloud of your mercy in the morning." He said, "God, I know the nighttime is bad, but," he said, "I'm going to be alive in the morning. They're not going to get me." Why? Because you are my refuge. You are my defense. And that's what we have to hang on to. When everyone turns against us, when we have no place to go, and it seems like we have lost everything we have, what we have to know is God is our refuge. God is our defense. God is the one who sees all and judges all. He will take care of us. He will lead us to the place that we should go if only we listen to him. David learned to trust in God at this time, even when he was forced to turn away from what he thought was God's plan for him for that moment. Even when he had fought and won many victories, and they were not acknowledged by the king, by the leader of Israel, he turned to God, his refuge, and that's what we need to learn how to do ourselves.